Welcome to Darren Batchelder's Real Estate Investing Show. Each week, you will learn how to grow your wealth through real estate investing. Be introduced to the players that are getting it done and learn how you can get involved. And now, here's your host, Darren Batchelder.
Hello, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. We've got Whitney Sewell on the show. Whitney, appreciate you coming on the show.
Honored to be here, Darren.
Fantastic. So just a little bit on how I know Whitney. So I don't know. It must be, we were just trying to brainstorm on when it is, but it's probably like over 2 years ago. I was a guest on Whitney's show, and that's how we first kind of came about, and I see him all over social media, and he's doing great things. So I'm excited to learn about what he's been up to since last time we talked. So Whitney, typically first question I ask is how many properties and how many units are you currently invested in?
We are managing about 1,000 or 900 to 1,000 units right now, and that's across, I'd have to think about it now, but it's 6 or 7 projects because we have 3 developments happening right now also, and so there's a lot of different deals. We just closed a large fund, and we just closed another project last week that was not in that count, and then we have 2 more under contract as well that should close over the next 2 months. So
fantastic. So I did get a chance to prepping for this, listen to an episode that you did with on Bigger Pockets. And I didn't know your story in terms of what you did before you started, getting into this industry. So if you could share with the listeners a little bit about that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I appreciate that. I appreciate you listening to that show as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is I look back and I think, man, the Lord just prepared me for lots of things. And I think I look back and I think, hard things change a person, right? And prepare people for things. And I'm thankful for some of the hard things. And so I'll share some of that. But I go back to March of 2001. And because it was March of that year when I decided to join the military. And we all know what happened about 6 months later. And I bet most of us, if you were alive then, you can remember where you were probably at right on 9/11. And so I joined the military. All of a sudden, our nation's attacked. Found myself shortly after spending a year in Iraq, toting around a machine gun. Never imagined, obviously, being in that situation. But I'm thankful I was able to serve. However, not everyone in my squad made it home. And so obviously some hard lessons, right? And you learn a lot about lots of things, in situations like that help prepare you for other things. But one thing I say the military taught me, Darren, was to have a never give up mentality. And it's just not an option to give up, right? When you're in combat, other people are depending on you. Their lives, your life is depending on you performing and you performing the way you were trained, right? And so you can't just quit. You get knocked down. It's not an option not to get back up. And so that was, probably some the first tastes of that, right? Came home. I still was trying to figure out what I was going to do as a career. And remember, I was raised to think that, I probably really need that piece of paper that says diploma at the top to have a good quote, job, right? And have that security, have that, those benefits. And I didn't have that. And so I didn't feel like college was for me. And so I thought, man, I don't know what I'm qualified to do. And I didn't mind to work hard. I knew that. But policing was a great transition for me. And so I left, I came out of the military or came home. I was still in the Guard at that time, National Guard. But I started with Kentucky State Police. There were 1,200 applicants for 5 positions. I was blessed to have one of those. I loved working the road as a police officer. I would have done it for free probably the first 2 years if I could have still ate something,
That's hilarious.
But I got married. My wife and I got married probably about a year and a half into that, and then we just ended up passing each other in the hallway the first whole year of marriage. And it was obvious pretty quickly then that, okay, while I enjoy this is just not what is best long term. And many of my friends in policing, it's such a difficult family position, unfortunately, right? And many of them have been married, divorced many, many times, or just no hopes of getting remarried because it is so difficult on a family. But I just said, you know what? That's just I don't want that for my wife and I. And we also wanted her to be able to stay at home when we had children.
Sure.
And that was going to be difficult on, say, 28 or 30,000 a year, on a salary at that time. So I had an income problem, right? And I wanted to fix that income problem. That was probably one of our bigger focuses then in looking for some means to supplement my income. I still felt pretty helpless. I had, such limiting beliefs, thinking, there's nothing else I can do. Like policing is now all I feel qualified to do. And so that's when I started looking for something, and in came real estate. This was like 2009 timeframe.
If I could
and
jump
so I thought,
in,
you know what?
Whitney.
Go ahead. What's that?
Let me jump in before we get into you getting into real estate. First of all, I want to say thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
It's weird. So I'm 51, and I think, I did not serve in the military, and I think to myself, this generation, my generation, and younger generations have not had to go. Unless you signed up, there hasn't been like a world war that we've been part of, and sometimes we just forget that people are voluntarily, signing up for service. So thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Secondly, that never give up attitude and philosophy that is ingrained in you in military, and I know you're going to talk about that. And how that helped in real estate. But I also want to get your opinion. This is just off the cuff a little bit. There are some countries that, require every individual to serve in the military at some point. And, based on your experience, do you think that would be a wise and beneficial requirement in the U.S.?
I do not believe the military is for everyone. And however, our nation would look a lot different if all of especially our young men went through boot camp alone, much less even if they ever saw combat. It's just like that seems very tough, right? When you're 17, 18 years old, oftentimes you've never experienced like somebody yelling at you like this, right? Or just experiences of being so tired. I mean, more tired than you've ever been in your life and still having to perform, doing things that you've never had to do before, putting yourself in situations where you have to overcome things. And that helps you to grow, right? In ways. And I talk to my boys about this all the time, about boot camp and that experience. Like that drill sergeant, he is yelling at you and saying things to you that most kids have never heard before, right? Have never been spoken to that way. But you have to realize that he's there to help you, right? He is there.
It doesn't feel like it at the moment, but
that's right. It doesn't feel like that at that time. But he is breaking you down, and but before long they're building you up, right? And they are there and pushing you, and before you know it. They have taught you so much, about yourself and just giving you like abilities that you already had, but you didn't know you had. You've never been pushed in those situations. And so would it be beneficial? It would be beneficial. But I'm not one to say that, it should be required for everyone. Right. And I would say, too, boot camp and military is a lot different now than it was when I went through, much less, 20 years before that.
Sure.
And so it would be beneficial for most young men and women. But most men, like I said, young men have never experienced something to help push them kind of into manhood. Hey, let's take more responsibility than probably you've ever had in your life, right? Let's have to push over that wall, when you are so tired and have to do things even in team situations and, and work together that you just haven't had to do before that.
Yeah, that's what I think is like, I don't know. I think there's I love the entrepreneurial spirit, and I love, being able to choose what you want to do in life and where your focus is. And, but I think that there's a lot in our country that is me focused,
Oh, yes.
And the younger generations, I don't think they're getting exposed to, team and responsibility and discipline, where something like boot camp or, a period of service, I've never done it, so I can't say. It's easy for me to say, yeah, everybody should have to do it. But that's why I wanted your opinion, because I do think that some some people that are growing up, they don't get that. They don't get that discipline. They don't get that responsibility.
It's their loss too. I mean,
Right.
they're losing so much, because of not being pushed in those ways early on and realizing, hey, you can accomplish more than what you really think you can.
Right, absolutely. And I also think it's kind of a completely different way of growing up. But I've talked to some people that have grown up on a farm. And look, as a young kid, you're having to do chores that a normal kid wouldn't have to do. So we digressed a little bit, but I wanted to just get your viewpoint on that. So then you go out and you serve as a police officer, and you said you were only making 20 to 30K. So
Yeah.
you get married, and although you love what you're doing, you have, as you mentioned, you have an income problem. So
Yeah.
where do you go from there?
Yeah, and I would say as well from your last comment about I also grew up on a farm.
Oh, you did?
I was mugging stalls before school. Many days. So
that's funny.
That was in me then, I think, and maybe that was part of that military, all that. But in law enforcement, I would say too, Darren, that never give up mentality was still so important, right? And it had to show from the way I wore my uniform to the way I responded to every dispatch. It had to show. And I mean, I would never know this 100%, but I do believe that there are times where my uniform saved my life.
Wow.
Meaning the diligence and the time that I took to make sure my uniform looked as good as it could. The creases were perfect. The buttons were shined, those things. Because guess what? Professional bad guys notice those things, right? They know who an easy target is. They know who's squared away. Because guess what? They want to make sure they're bigger and badder than their opponent, just like anybody else, right? And they're really good at that, typically. Not always, but they are. And so I had to make sure that, hey, I was ready to have that mentality, obviously, in everything I did there. But I like I said, I enjoyed that, but I did have the income problem. And I started searching for what else is going to supplement that. And in came real estate. And something I learned, though, this is like 2008, 9 time period. And when I started reading and learning that not only Darren had one or two people built wealth in real estate, but
right.
The majority of people's wealth had been built in real estate, and not only at, let's say, multimillionaires or billionaires. In my thinking at that time, it was so much smaller. But what I realized was like so many people have built extra income just through some rentals, right? I mean, they may have 10 rentals, and hey, that helps supplement their income and their retirement, or puts their kid through school, or those things. And so I thought, okay, if all of these people can do it, guess what? I can do something. I can have a few rentals. We can. I never imagined owning an apartment community at that time. I would have said you were nuts if you'd have said, that was going to be me one day. But what I did realize is that if all these people can do it, I can do it too. I can do something. So we did. Pretty quickly, we bought 2 triplexes, and I self-managed. I was policing at night. I was managing these apartments during the day. And we had also bought a home. We were living in it and remodeling it at the same time. So you talk about a new stress on a new marriage. It was
absolutely.
Intense,
I can imagine.
At that time, it was like our own boot camp, really. But and my wife had to wash dishes in the bathtub a lot longer than I would like to admit, but she's just an amazing woman. But we learned a lot, right? We made a ton of mistakes on those 2 triplexes. I tried to lead, and manage with my heart, and that, man, I just got taken advantage of, by these tenants. But what happened soon after is I learned about a federal agent position. And again, I never imagined being
federal what?
Federal agent. So I became a federal agent soon after this. And so I thought that policing was like the only thing I was qualified for. And the Lord opened an opportunity for me to meet a guy who was a federal agent. And I was in a scale facility on the side of the interstate one day with a bunch of other officers talking. I waited for all these other officers to leave, and this guy was still there. And so I was talking to him. He ended up helping me through the entire hiring process. But all that to say, I became a federal agent. That moved us to Roanoke, Virginia. And again, becoming a federal agent is not easy. Going into law enforcement is not easy. Another boot camp, going in the military and going overseas. All these things helped shape me. The Lord used in big ways to help me to become an entrepreneur, I think, but to do many other things. But becoming a federal agent, that increased my income. That gave me better schedule and benefits, all those things. And soon after, and since you heard the interview, you'll know this, Darren, but most people don't know this, is I started training horses professionally.
Right.
And so I still had a few rentals, and I even had a partner where I had a 15 unit. But this was a passion of mine since I was a little boy. And I love training, and it became pretty easy to me. And so I built a brand. I started selling horses for more money than I ever imagined. And doing tricks and all kinds of things that I just never believed were possible for me to do. But what happened, Darren, is I was federal agent during the day, and I had another full-time job of training horses at night. I would run home, change clothes, load the horses up, go to the arena. I would have 4 or 5 horses to ride. I would give lessons as well. I would be literally riding horses at midnight, come back home. It's just this massive cycle of madness, right? Never seeing the kids or my wife. And so my wife and Chelsea and I were on the beach one fall, and we were walking, we were praying, and what I call now thinking time. And it's so important that you do this every day if you can to some extent, but have thinking time, right? Have time where you can reflect, have time where you can say, hey, you know what, is this working? Is it not? Is this where we're both trying to go? Is it going to do that? And that's ultimately what we did. We were just praying, walking on the beach and thinking about, is this what is best? And it was obvious at that point to both of us that, this is not what is best. I am making more money. I am, making it, even training horses, like I said, making more money doing that than I ever imagined. But it was never going to be passive. It was never going to build massive wealth. It was never, if I got injured, guess what? It's over with, right? And so right then we said, you know what? I know real estate can do this for us. We had dabbled a little bit, but never been just 100% serious about the real estate business. And so we said, you know what? It's now or never. We're going to go do this. And we came, this is like September. And between Christmas and New Year's, we had sold our farm and sold our house. And we were moving out of that. And moving, pulling out of the driveway.
Was the farm and the house on the same property? I can't remember.
It was.
Okay.
It was. It was. And so it was a place we had always dreamed of. And I say that to say, when we were pulling out, I'll just never forget my wife and I both just bawling like babies, it was a big day for us, right? We were kind of venturing off, but we were committing. And I stress that because it was really that level of commitment that took that to make us go do what was next, right? And that was commercial real estate, and because what started happening at this same time is I started going to some conferences, and I was looking for a mentor, but I started going to conferences to talk to people and to talk to different people who were mentors. And what I found, though, was similar to what I found a few years earlier, was that so many people were buying 100-unit complexes or bigger, and they'd only been in the business a few years. And that was just like
mind-blowing.
That was mind-blowing to me.
Right.
I thought, okay, you know what? If all of them can do it, hey, I can do this too.
Sure.
I'll figure this out, right? And so we did. We bought a small house in town. I built an office in the basement, and that's where I practically lived for the next 3 years. Seriously, it was quite madness. So we quickly started a daily podcast, and there were times I would record, say, 12 to 15 interviews in one day, back to back to back. So 2 days a month. I would have recording days like that, but it was still, for that time period, it was still more than 2 full-time jobs. Just traveling to conferences, more interviews, investor calls after work. It was quite madness. However, it didn't last forever, and I say during that time, it was just crucial that that's when that morning routine was more important than ever, right? Sure. And I say that to say my wife and I, that was a time when we could connect, right? Early in the morning, that was when we could say, what's happening with the kids, what's happening this weekend, how's the business going, but just to say, how are you doing, right? Because other than that, she would literally, Darren, pack me lunch to go to the basement to work, and I'm not proud of this, but my boys knew they wouldn't see me until maybe Saturday afternoon or Sunday, even though I'm in the house. And so it was just a time of quite madness. But, it was very intense. But thankfully, it didn't last forever. And I'll end that story on a high point, because we are back out on a farm now, and believe it or not, I actually have bought back my best horse that I ever sold.
Oh,
and
no
so
way!
That horse
Really?
now he's teaching my boys now, and so it's just a sweet story, just the Lord's kindness to our family, and so I just never imagined it, Darren. Now, like I said before, right when we got started, how many units we have, and our team's growing like mad. We're hiring a asset manager starting next week. That's just amazing. And an acquisitions director on the way. Investor relations people we're fixing to start hiring. It's just the Lord's been kind. A lot of growth.
Fantastic. Hey, let me ask you a few things based on what you said. One was, you're the first person that said this, and I'm a big believer in it. I've tried to tell my kids this, but they don't, I guess, see the value in it. But think. Like, actually go to a quiet place and just think. Like, I think
That's right.
I think that so many people are just caught up in busyness that they don't ever have time to think. And I don't know if people are afraid to think, or like, I don't know how to think. It's kind of like people, when you tell people to pray for the first time, they may not know how to pray. But like, thinking is so key, because one idea, can completely change the trajectory of where you go and where you focus. So talk a little bit about, why do you see value in thinking, and like, how do you do it? And do you form it as part of your habits and that sort of thing?
I'll recommend. I didn't know this book at this time, but I'll recommend a book while we're talking about this, because this is where I got that term, thinking time, and it's called "The Road Less Stupid" by Keith Cunningham. He's a real estate guy, business guy. He lost it all at one time, come back, and man, every chapter in this book is like its own business segment on, hey, you need to be doing these things, but at the end of every chapter, he says, now go have thinking time. Right. And he just encourages that. And like I said, I didn't know that at that time. But what going to the beach caused was that, like, space. Right. A time to forget about the farm, to forget about the horses, to forget about the day job, and us to just be there together. Right. There was no, nothing else pulling on us at that time. And it allowed space for thinking time. And what I say now, like, when I have time to just think, I can tell oftentimes that's when I know there's not a ton of appointments lined up, I can be the most creative, right? I'll have new ideas. That's when I can start implementing new things, or see things in the business. Oh, I've never noticed that before, but you have to allow space for it. And I think at first you feel like, well, that's just not productive enough.
Not productive. Right? Or, some people think it's not productive.
That's right. That's right. That's right. But when you can get in a routine of that, but even start writing down a few things. And even in the book, he talks about thinking time in some specific ways to do it. Like, he has a chair in a specific part of the house with a specific notepad, a specific pen, and he'll even put dots on the page. And he even says, like, the dots on the page start requiring his mind to, like, think of something to put there. It's like, don't just have a blank page, like, at least put a dot or put a number or something, or have some things you're working on that you can start jotting some things down just to get the mind going. And I have just seen that time and time again, and I've not been as faithful to do it every day. However, in the morning times, I still see that, okay, my wife and I will be praying, or we'll be reading together scripture. And then there's times we're talking about the business. And it's just so cool, though. Like, she's not in real estate, but it's pretty cool how she'll have insight into things that
she has
are
a different
so
perspective
helpful for me.
Yeah,
that's right.
She has a different perspective, right. and then the cool part about being an entrepreneur is that you can, take it in, and you can say, you know what, I understand your view, but I'm not going to do it. And other things, you're like, wow, that was a great idea. I'm going to, try to implement that. So that's fantastic. Yeah, I remember going last. It was last January. My wife and I went on vacation, and we went to a really nice resort. And I get up early, and she sleeps in, and I'd go down and I'd read, and I was like, after that week, I was like, holy cow! Like, I just felt so charged, and I had a completely different focus on where I was going. And if I didn't have that time set aside, I may not have had done that. So I think it's so important. So another thing I want you to talk about is, you've mentioned it probably 4 or 5 times, is God. God's influence in your life, and in the hard times. And look, everybody's life, we have crossroads, decision points, and it sounds like you and your wife are people that will seek guidance from God. And so I want to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We are followers of Jesus, and our marriage, our business, our life would not be like it is without him guiding and directing. And that is one of the biggest things that when I was talking about like asking my wife, well, she's not in real estate, but and if you are a Christian, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But the Holy Spirit lives in her, right? And what that our Christ, he knows everything about our business, right? He knows everybody I'm going to talk to today. He knows every in and out of everything. Right, every detail of our life, but he speaks through her as well, right? Or he speaks through my business partner, that also knows the Lord, and so the Lord has changed everything for us. And I'll share this. My wife and I were raised in church, but we never had a relationship with Christ. We were quote Christians, right? If you ask us, but if you'd asked me who Jesus was, I couldn't have told you hardly anything. They were in my life didn't reflect that either. And then the Lord used some friends of ours in a massive way to show us, hey, what that looked like and how sweet that relationship with Christ is, but really just the depravity of sin and my need for a Savior. And our eyes were opened in a whole new way. The Lord saved us, and I mean, it's just everything's been different, since then, right? Our relationship, my wife and I, to everything, right? Even our, and I didn't share about it when I was sharing about our story, but even our desire, we have 3 children through adoption, and the Lord has just used that in a massive way to put a big why, a big mission behind our business. And when we moved to Roanoke, and I'll share quickly, but when we moved to Roanoke, my wife and I had been married maybe 2 years, 2.5 years at that time. We heard a pastor talk about how they had adopted. We were pretty new to believing in Jesus or as our Savior at that time. But we'd heard this pastor talk about how they had adopted and how there's 150 plus million orphans in the world, how it can cost 40 to 60 grand to bring a child home through adoption. We couldn't believe it, right? We'd never been exposed to adoption. We were raised in a one stoplight town. We didn't know anybody that was adopted before, never even talked about it. But on our way home from this event, we were just thinking about it, praying about it, and we were like, well, why would we not adopt? It just seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed that simple to us, and I'm thankful for our ignorance in the process, because the process is quite daunting. But man, you know what? We started the process a week later. Within a week, we had turned in our application to adopt from Ethiopia.
Wow.
2 years later to the month, our first son, Samuel, came home from Ethiopia. A year later, our second son, Elijah, came home. And then we also have a daughter now, Eden Joy, who's 2.5. She also came to our family through adoption. And so, the first couple processes, though, you imagine that expense, right? On that first salary I told you about, or even as a federal agent, it's like everything I'm making a year, right?
Sure.
And it's like, how are we going to come up with this? But the Lord would provide in just amazing ways that we could not even expect. We did fundraisers. We raised over $38,000 for our second adoption, and numerous other fundraisers. But what we started to figure out is, obviously there's such a big need, right? There's so many children that need families and need parents. But most people who would be great parents, it's that exact response here. And they say, well, Whitney, that's more than I make in a year. How can we even, where would we even start to do that, right? So it's just not even an option. They just don't even second guess it. And so we created a foundation that helps these families, and so financially. And so we committed half of our personal profits to this foundation. And so we're giving grants now to families big grants to help them through financially through this adoption process. And so we've hired a guy now that's helping us with foundation, so we can do that well. I can't physically be everywhere and help all those families, but we want to make sure we're taking as good a care of them as possible. I think we partnered with 10 families last year. 9 of them, I think, now have actually brought a child home. So
wow.
It's so encouraging to see that happen. And I hope we triple that this year. And so we've just now started more marketing for the foundation. I see our investors. I see lots of people, they want to partner in that, right? 100% of their donations goes towards helping a family. All right, and back to your question about the Lord. Our our goal is for these children to be placed into families where they can hear about Jesus, right? That is their ultimate need. More than water, more than shelter, they need Jesus. And so that is our goal for these children, but they need a loving home too. So that's our goal through the foundation.
What is the name of the foundation?
So the name of the foundation is the LifeBridge Foundation, but I will say we're in the process of rebranding that, just in case anybody's listening to that. You can find it at lifebridgecapital.com. You go to the About page all the way at the bottom. You'll see a little more story about, a little story about my wife and I, and be able to find the website there. But it's thelifebridgefoundation.com.
Okay, so you've got the LifeBridge Foundation is for the adoption, and then you have LifeBridge Capital, which is the investment arm into multifamily. Right. Okay. So first, hey, that is freaking phenomenal, and that's probably another way that you saw God at work is like you decided, hey, I'll put 50% of the profits to this, and had no idea it would grow to this level. So I live in the Dallas area. I've been here for like 11 years. Prior, I'm originally an East Coast guy from Connecticut, but I lived in South Florida for like 14 years before Dallas. And my wife and I, we were part of got associated with a foundation called the Sheridan House, and there was a gentleman that started that foundation, Bob Barnes, and he said something similar to what you did. He laughs about it because he's like, okay, God, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to put all the profits of the book to, help the missions. And he's like, I had no idea that I would write 10 books and that it would be, published all over the world. And, the amount of money that came in through those books, and he got all, 99% of it was given away, but he got to see God work through that, which was pretty amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah. I believe like stewardship includes not just that 10%, right? But it's like, what do you do with the other 90%, right? And I just believe in Scripture, there's tons of places that show where God he honors people who are faithful, are faithful stewards, right? And with their resources, and that's not just financially, but that's their time as well.
Right. Absolutely. So we digressed again, but talk a little bit about now you get into the real estate side and you fully commit, which I think that's an important piece too. Look, whether you're going to be a passive investor or you're going to try to get into buying real estate, you have to commit. So you actually made the decision and you committed. You sold your house and your farm. Now what'd you do?
Yeah, and I would say too, at that same time, we were starting our third adoption process, and so we knew that there was going to be a massive expense there, right? And I was hiring a mentor to help me, and we were like, I don't know where all the money's going to come from, to do these things. So selling the farm was helpful, but it also that was a passion of mine. I enjoyed doing that, but I just stress it to say, it was helpful to cut that off, right? And to say, somebody calls me to train the horse, I just can't now. Right. I don't even have the stuff anymore to do it. Right. And so I have to be committed to the real estate business. But it just took that level of commitment. But what happened then, Darren, was the daily podcast was birthed, and started going to conferences and started meeting all these people like I was talking about, and I was just encouraged in so many ways. I would come home so motivated, right? Hey, if all these people can do it, I can do it too. I can figure this out. But what also happened is, just growing my network, right? That podcast pushed me, Darren, to hire people and to grow a team. It grew my network very fast. 7 days a week, right? I mean, it's, you imagine all the people that I was connecting with, very fast, 15 people in a day. And I know I couldn't remember all of them.
That's crazy.
But it's, you can remember the ones you want to connect with again, or you want to follow up with. And a lot of those people became mentors as well, right? They didn't know it. But even through the podcast, it became my own university, right? I could, if we're working on a project and I had a question, well, guess what's probably going to come up during an interview, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that became my own university. It costs as much as a university degree as well. But that pushed me in ways that I never imagined. So I got to speak in front of more people than I ever imagined, and larger stages. And, I just never saw that coming, when that happened. But what happened too is I started being able to raise money, right? Meeting all these investors and working on all those connections and showing them, hey, just building the relationship so we can eventually work together more and more. I met a business partner and who was focused on the deal side, focused on acquisitions, right, and broker relations. And so when we were able to partner, it's like you turn the jet engine on, right? It was all of a sudden the igniters came on, and I had this part of the business and he had that part, and we were like, boom, we could move forward. Our first project together was 30 million, and so that's not common, right? That's not common. But we raised, I think, around 7 million, I think, for that project, which is also not common. And I go back to even our conversation. I'm so grateful you asked too, just about the Lord in this, because that would not have happened. All the connections the Lord has allowed me to make. And I see that even more now. People that want to partner with us now, it doesn't make sense, right? They could partner with anybody in our industry, and they partner with us, and some that everybody listening would know of right now, if I said their name. But so it just doesn't make sense other than what the Lord's hand in it. But that's something he did through the podcast, me traveling, meeting people, following up with people, and just going and not giving up.
Fantastic. Well, not giving up, that goes back to the military stuff, right? Hey, listeners, if you don't know Whitney Sewell, he's got a podcast. It's the Real Estate Syndication Show with Whitney Sewell, and you're up to close to 1,200 episodes.
We are. Yeah.
That's crazy to think about. That's your university. You've talked to almost 1,200 people about real estate and, learning each one of those interviews. And then, like you said, building your network. So a few things I want to ask you. One, talking to 1,200 people, or just shy of it, what are the biggest learning lessons?
That's a hard one. A lot of people say, "What's been the best show?"
Yeah, right.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I know that's tough. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever read, what was it? The Tribe.
Tribe of Mentors.
Yes, he had 2 books, but one of them I thought was better. Yeah, one of them is better. Not the 4-hour work week. It was the one with the interviews. He took off his podcast, and I thought it was phenomenal, because you feel like you're getting into the heads of all these other people. And so there's wisdom there. So, all right, I put you on the spot. Just a few nuggets, a few learning lessons from, I don't want to say what's the best show, because you're really
and that's so hard, right? After that many, it's hard to remember them all as well. Some definitely stand out. And oftentimes I would say too, it's helpful guys who have been interviewed a bunch, right? They're very polished on presenting and whatnot. Excuse me. But oftentimes it's ones that, it's not always this like amazing piece of advice either. It's like, these 3 things helped me to do this thing.
Sure.
Right. And one, even this was very early on, was Michael Becker. I've had him on numerous times now, but I remember he was like the 3rd person I interviewed, or 5th person I interviewed, or something. And I was so thankful, because obviously he was very polished at that time, and I was very new to interviewing. And but he made it very easy, right? And he produced a good show, right? But quality content for the listeners, right? And then I've had him back, since then. But they've been there. He's not the only one. There's been numerous. But I would say too, oftentimes it was to the ones who were speaking into what I was dealing with at the moment, and I know that's not very specific, but oftentimes it's, in doing 12 to 15 a day, it's just hard.
I'll give you one example. Yeah. So I'm only on episode, I'm in the 80s, but one thing I talk to people a lot about is fear, and how they conquered their fear, and how they took action even though they were afraid. And so most of these highly accomplished investors, they'll admit to me like, yeah, Darren, man, I was afraid. I was afraid on my first single family deal I did. I was afraid on my first multifamily deal I did. And now I'm doing, $30, $50 million deals, and I'm not afraid because I've done it so many times. But here's what they say is, I've heard it consistently from a lot of different people, is that they thought to themselves, what is the worst thing that can happen?
Right.
Am I going to die? And can I live with that worst case scenario? Because I think that, this is for the listeners that are, look, they're just thinking about getting into the first, passive deal, but they're scared, or this is, the investor that wants to, buy real estate for the first time, but they're scared. And all these other people are scared too, but they think, what's the worst thing that can happen? And can I live with that? And then they think the opposite. What's the upside? And they're like, holy cow, the upside is so much better.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you said that. I can remember some specific times where somebody said that to me early on. And I think it's so helpful because early on too is when you receive the most opposition, right, from family or friends who aren't willing to take that leap or that risk, that so-called risk that you feel it's a big risk anyway. But it's exactly what you just said. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Living in America, in most of our families, like, you're going to have a place, even if you lost your home, you're still going to have a warm place to sleep that night and probably food too, right?
Right.
I mean, more times than not. And yes, that stinks. But man, what if you never tried? What if you never try, And so that's why we were willing to sell the farm. It's like, we'll have another farm one day. But man, if we don't do this right now, we're just going to keep in this daily grind. We're going to keep the W-2 and just be content, right, with that. And we'll always wonder, what would have been, right? Could we have done it, right? And so I'm so thankful that we did, that we were willing to take that so-called risk and not listen to all the naysayers who had never done it before, right? And I'll share with you too, during that time, I met with two people that everybody would also know, probably listening to this in our industry. There's very big names. I was at two different conferences sharing with them that I was going to do a daily podcast. Both of these individuals said, Whitney, you're crazy. Don't do that. So, up to this point, I had been very gung-ho, like, no, I can make this happen. I'm going to do it, But considering who these two people were, I thought, well, maybe I should reconsider this, right? And so I was speaking to my mentor about it, and he said, just so quick, this is why a mentor is so crucial, some kind of mentor, somebody to speak into you when this happens, right? I was telling him this, and he said, Whitney, that's why you have to do it, because it's too much work for most people. And I was like, okay, now I'm back on track, right? Now I'm back in, I got it. Okay, we're going to go do this, right? And so that was, anyway, I needed that kick in the tail every once in a while, just like anyone else, That's
huge, That's the people that will do things that most people won't, are the ones that end up having, exponential success.
That's right.
So, all right. So for my learning, this is, it may be helpful to me more than some other listeners, but you do have a daily podcast, which, I have a weekly podcast, and I just think that is a ton of work. How did you, what's the biggest one thing you did to save yourself time?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I get it often. But I would say, too, if I told you, Darren, that 6 months from now you're going to have to run a marathon, or let's say just the 26 whatever miles, for most people they'd be like, oh my goodness, I don't know that I can get that done, right? But let's say we got to that day, and then I said, well, you know what? It's only 12 miles. If you'd been practicing for 26 miles, you'd say, okay, no problem. I can do that 12 miles. But if I had said 12 miles in the very beginning, you'd have been still just as stressed about that.
Sure.
Right. And so think about, where you set your mind on those things. What are you limiting yourself by? Because oftentimes there's somebody else already doing it, right? There's somebody else that's already figured these things out.
Right.
And sometimes when you don't even have to know how they did it, but just to know that somebody else has done it sometimes is helpful to know. However, I would say too, deciding to do a daily podcast changed everything for me in so many ways. But I had no idea the level of commitment it was going to take. I mean, it was such a massive commitment for those first 2 to 3 years. But one thing it helped me with, though, that I didn't see coming was that if I had done a weekly podcast, I would have tried to have done all the audio editing, the video editing, the show notes, the posting it. I would have tried to finding all the guests, all these things, components of producing a good podcast. I would have said, you know what, I'm going to save some money. I can get all that done myself. Right. Most likely, I would have gotten frustrated. I would have gotten behind and, it would have been halfway produced, probably would have quit. Right. And who knows if I'd still be in real estate today. But knowing that I was doing 7 days a week, that wasn't even an option.
Right.
I knew.
Right. There's no way you could do it.
It wasn't even possible.
Right.
And I talk about it often, and I call it like I overcommitted, but I call it in a good way, right? I overcommitted in a way that it was not possible for me to do those things. I have never edited, this may be surprising, but I've never edited the first piece of audio or video, and I don't want to.
Right.
Like, I don't even know how to do it, and I don't want to do it, right? It's not the highest and best use of my time. It wasn't the highest and best use of my time then, and it definitely is not now. But I had to build a team. And so what happened is, guess what? Immediately I had to start building processes. Well, how are we going to get this many shows done? And I had to personally think through those things. And then I brought a virtual assistant on to help me think through that and start doing things. Well, then all of a sudden I had 5 virtual assistants, right? And they're all doing something different for the podcast. They're all over the world, and I'm managing this show, right? And we're managing the production. Everybody had a different skill set. And so I had to learn how to hire people. I had to learn how to find people with specific skill sets that I needed. And that's how we did it. I mean, we built that team.
That's huge.
I've not all, I probably about 200 shows in, believe it or not, my audio editor couldn't keep up. And so I switched to a production company. It didn't go the best, switched to another one. They did amazing until I actually brought it back in house again. And now I've built we have like 10 full-time VAs now in the Philippines who are, they're producing my show. We're producing numerous people's shows now as well. But because of what you just said, we started building the processes, and then somebody just asked me, well, Whitney, could you want to produce our show? And I was like, well, it wouldn't be that much more to take on another weekly show. It's like we're already producing so many. It's not that much to throw one more in per week, or now it's numerous more. But still, because of the processes, it allowed us to keep scaling. It allowed me to think in different ways than if I'd tried to do a weekly podcast.
Yeah, that's huge. On the real estate side, a story from one of the guests was, based on what you're saying, overcommitting and setting really big, audacious goals. And then, even if you don't hit that goal, it's still bigger than what you thought you were going to do. So he was looking to double his unit count every year. So he did 2 units, and then the next year he wanted to do 4, and the next unit he wanted to do 8, and et cetera. And so he gets to year 3, and, he's going to have to do 8 units. And he's like, what if I change that number? And I'm like, what'd you change to? He's like, 800. From 8 units to 800 units. And I'm like, holy cow, that's a huge shift. I'm like, where'd you end up? He's like, 464 or something like that. And so he didn't hit the 800.
That's such a good example.
But he was so much further than 8 units. I mean, can you, so that's that, you answered it very similar. So that's great. I like that. Hey, talk about, I've seen you, you're doing deals, you're raising capital, but a lot of people are focused on deal specific syndications, and a few people, including yourself, have kind of moved to setting up funds. And so talk about the fund versus, individual syndications. What do you like? What do you don't like? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, a great question. And it's a learning curve, to say the least. You're right. Shifting a business model like that. So just to give a little context, we've done single asset syndications on every project, up until this large fund, about the middle of last year.
So how many years were you doing the syndication deal specific?
3 years.
So 3 years. Yep. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So 2 to 3 years. And then we say, you know what, because of the market too, because of the lack of deal flow and things like that, we could see the benefit in having a fund because it makes us that much more competitive. And so the brokers that we work with every day, they had already seen us raise tens of millions of dollars in a few hours, numerous times. They knew we could do that. However, when they're talking to a seller and they can say, you know what, this buyer, he already has $20 million like ready to go
in the bank.
right? It is a very different conversation then, right? Versus, well, I've seen them raise the money numerous times. I know they can do it. But when you have a seller that's definitely wants to sell, definitely needs to sell, they're on a timeline, time crunch, which oftentimes seems like they are, they want the certainty of close. And we thought, okay, if we can do a fund, we can have certainty of close. Right. And so we're going to be a bigger player then, or seen as a bigger player. We're going to be taken more seriously as well, even though we've done many deals, with these brokers. It's just a different avenue. So, but it's a change of mindset for our investors as well. And people think, well, there's some investors that love this and some they do. However, when you condition your investor base, right? They know the types of deals that you do. Maybe many of them have invested with you numerous times because they like what you're doing.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden you change it, right? And so you have to think through that. And obviously 506B versus 506C. And I'll tell you a little trick that we did. And so we could do both. But what we did was we launched a 506C fund, right? Which means only accredited investors. We could advertise, right, as the biggest thing. So we do have to verify all the accreditation statuses of every investor for the 506C fund, right? So what happens, though, is we launch this fund, we raise a bunch of money, and then finally we say, okay, this is the date we're closing the fund, all right? But then what we did after that was we launched another entity, okay? We call it a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, okay? And it's an entity that is a 506B entity. All right. And so what happens is now this entity, we put it back out just like a fund. It wasn't a fund, but it's like a fund. Operates the same way. But what happens is we will raise $5 million in this entity, this 506B entity, meaning now our sophisticated investors can also invest in this entity. And because and this may be too technical, you can tell me, Darren, if it is. But if I can get the value of this entity to $5 million, all of a sudden it becomes an accredited investor, and guess what? It invests in our fund. And so it was a way for all of our sophisticated investors. Yeah. So I mean, I've had so many sophisticated investors invest in every project nearly that we've done.
Sure.
Right? I mean, they've been so loyal. And when we launched that fund, so many of them were like, "Are you serious?" like we can't invest in that, And I hate that, right? I hate that. I wanted to have that opportunity for them, so I was like, give it 2 months. There's going to be another opportunity, And so there was. And so we launched that entity. They could all invest in that. We get it to $5 million. Then all of a sudden it becomes an investor in the fund, right? And so it's all legal. And then that's another reason, too, why we have an obvious close date for the 506C fund before the 506B opens, so that all of our documentation can be very clear. And if you're in this business, you understand why the SEC. You want to ensure that your documentation of that when you're advertising, when you're not, when you're taking sophisticated investors, or need that pre-existing relationship and documenting that versus when you don't have to, is very clear. And we wanted to make sure that there was no gray area there whatsoever.
Let me ask you a qualifying question on that. So you closed the 506C fund. Let's just say you close it December 31st. And then the 506B opens on January 1st. Is that
there was probably a week to 2 week gap there on purpose.
Okay. So January 15th, the 506B opens, but if the fund is already closed, how does the 506B invest in the fund?
So what happened is, it depends on how the fund is structured too, right? I mean, obviously we can control how, when people can invest, when people can't, in the fund, or we set those timelines. And so on our legal docs, they had till the end of the year.
Right.
Okay. But purposely on everything else, like we said, we're not accepting another investor after such and such date. I don't remember what that was exactly, but let's say it was November the 15th.
Sure.
We said, okay, November the 15th, no more investors are coming into the fund. It's done. And two, part of that is announcing it, right, to our investors, to everybody, like that it's obvious. Like if we were ever investigated, it's obvious that we blasted it out to everybody. It is closed at this time, right? We're not still taking people. We weren't trying to have a back door into that.
Right.
However, our documentation showed that it could be open through the end of the year. Okay, so we had that option, and so, but knowing that we were going to do this entity, and it was going to be closed before the end of the year, and it would invest, in the fund. So that was the whole purpose there. But
I think that's
goal
awesome.
behind a lot of that, though, is the documentation, right? To show if we're ever investigated, we can say, this is our intention. This is what happened exactly on these dates, when we could advertise, when we couldn't, pre-existing relationship, all those things.
All right. Another question on fund. You raise capital and you close the fund. Do you raise all the capital before you go out and buy anything?
Good question. So a big holdup for your investors are going to be, I don't want a blind fund. I'm not investing in any blind fund. I want to know what that, when an investor's been used to seeing the deal and liking the, investing in the specific deal, he's going to say, I want to see the deal first. I'm not going to invest in a blind fund. Many of them did anyway, because we have a relationship with them, right? They trust us already. It's like, yep, here's another 100,000 to whatever it was. There will be a few that say, you know what, I want to know what the deal is.
Yeah.
And we purposely timed it this way. But what we did is we had 2 deals under contract before we launched the fund.
Oh, you did?
We did. So we had 2 deals under contract, so we could say, hey, it's not completely blind. You already see these 2, this is our plan. These are the types of deals we've been doing. That's what we plan to do in the fund. And guess what? We already have 2 of those under contract. You can see those right here. And they were actually in 2 different markets, in the 2 markets that we wanted to be in for the fund. And so it wasn't completely blind. And I think that was helpful, right? That they could see those 2 deals. And actually, while I believe, if I remember right, while the fund was still open, another deal closed, in the fund. So there was still a little bit of time while it was open, and there was like the 3 deals closed in the fund. And so it wasn't completely blind, but you are going to receive pushback from that, especially depending on how your investor base is conditioned, right? And I think that there's a growth transition there for most operators, right? Most are used to doing single asset syndications for a while. Then it's like, you know what? We've got enough track record. We've done enough deals. We've got a big enough investor base. I think we can do a fund.
Well,
right?
It's funny though, you say that, but I've interviewed a lot of syndicators that have a ton of units. And I ask them the question, why haven't you started a fund? And like, I hear silence. Like it's, and I think to myself, you know what? It comes down to fear again. It's like these people were, afraid to do their first syndication, but then now they've got 5 or 6 or 7 syndications done. And now they're afraid, if I do a discretionary fund, that what if the investors don't come? Yeah.
And I'll tell you one way that we would combat that is, like, we had already done enough deals to where, we knew we could raise 8 to 10 million in a few hours typically, or have commitments for that. Right. And so if, let's say we launch the fund and a few weeks in, there's like $2 million in there and we're getting pretty nervous, which didn't happen, thank the Lord. But if that happened, well, guess what? We're going to close the fund. All of a sudden we're going to have some single asset syndications, I mean, whoever invested in the fund would still get the same thing, would still partner on those same deals probably. However, we'd start doing some single asset syndications and raise the money that way. Right. And so there's kind of a backup plan still, of course, because the first time you just don't know. It's kind of like the first time raising money.
Yeah.
You don't really know what those, everybody said, oh yeah, I'm looking to place $1 million. I hear that all the time. And I say, well, have you ever raised money before? No. Right. But that's what they've told me. I was like, well, count on about a fourth of that, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah. It is a different animal. So, all right. One more fun question. If you raise the capital in the fund and then you keep it open for a while and you start buying assets, because I've seen funds do multiple different things. Some will raise all the money and then they go buy, 1 or 2 or 3 properties to, fulfill all the money that they've raised. Other funds will keep the fund open for a year or 2 or 3 years, and they'll continue to buy assets along the way. And so, from an investor standpoint, if somebody invests right away, right when you open the fund, versus investing 6 months later when you've already bought 2 or 3 deals, how do you provide different valuations for each? Or do you? Great
question. And so it's 2 very different ways to operate a fund. And so I'd say typically you invest, in a large fund. Let's say, some operators, they may raise $500 million, $500 million, in a massive fund, right? And go buy just portfolios, all kinds of things. But that may be over a couple years, right? And so the person that invested early on is typically going to get some kind of bonus, right? Or they're going to earn more for a longer period of time than that person that signed up a year later, right? But the way we structured our fund was it was open. It's similar to a single asset syndication, really, or single asset fund. Well, it's open for this period of time. This is when you can invest. It's going to close. You start earning on January 1st. Okay, so it's kind of like we close the deal, and this is when you start earning, and so everybody's earning the same. And so people can't invest now in the fund, right? It's not open to invest. And so you can do it both ways. I think leaving it open for a long period of time is an accounting nightmare, and K1 nightmare, and your CPA is going to hate you, but it's part of the business. If you plan to do that type of fund, then fine, right? But we did not plan to do that. Keeping a fund open from one year to the next is a tax nightmare, and accounting burden, like I said. And so we didn't want to do it that way. But we also, like I said, had a few deals under contract. We knew we were going to have it open for so long. We wanted these deals in there, and we wanted to close it. And so now guess what? We have a track record, right? We've done a fund. Now we'll have fund 2 soon, probably in the next few months, right? That we'll have fund number 2. And believe it or not, there's this psychology thing to people, it's like, oh, well, if this is fund 8, well, they're pretty experienced, right?
Right.
There's like this thing that happens, right? But if we had fund 1 for 2 years, it's still going to be fund 1.
Right.
And also what happens is your investors who are used to investing in all these deals, like some of our investors, it's like they may put 200 in every deal. They don't, right as we put it out, right? But they're going to do that with the fund as well, unfortunately. So we put a fund out, and it may be across 5 or 6 projects. They still put 200,000 in,
right?
And it may be, it's a lot larger, right? And so there's this mental hurdle that they have to get past that says, well, okay, this is their next deal. I'm going to invest in it too, right? And so it's this. I feel like for us, it's going to be this transition to where yes, we'll do even larger funds, but as our network grows, our investor base grows, even the trust, right, and the loyalty between us and our investors grows. We're going to be able to raise more and more money in a fund. We'll probably have funds that are open longer, like you're talking about. But I want to condition our investors a little bit, right? And I want us to even have more of a track record, because we are also learning a lot more about operating a fund, during that process as well.
That makes a ton of sense. So what is the next big stretch goal for you, man? You keep on pushing the boundaries.
Right now we're in a big hiring frenzy. We just hired an asset manager, actually starts Monday. Maybe I mentioned that. Acquisitions guy. We know the acquisitions guy. I think we're going to hire, and more to come on acquisitions as well. We're fixing to hire investor relations people. We're going to start actually promoting those job positions. And I think over the next, I think my business partner and I said we wanted $500 million in assets under management by the end of 2023. And I think we're probably going to hit that halfway through this year.
Wow.
And so it's crazy. Probably before that, actually.
$500 million in assets under management. And this is all coming from, when we started this story, making 20, 30 grand as a police officer, trying to figure out how you're going to do it. Maybe I'll rent out, you bought 2 triplexes. You just can't see it. And look, I think that's such a big thing for people to understand, is that, if you don't take the first step, all the follow-on steps don't come, so whether it's getting into real estate or whether it's starting your own business, you have to take the step. You have to, take the risk, or else all the things that layer on top don't happen. Here we are, Whitney Sewell, 500 million in assets, most likely this year. That's fantastic. So, what do you like to do outside of work?
We're very involved in our church. And so I'd say outreach, through our church, helping with, things there. Time with family is crucial now. Like I said, for those 3 years, roughly, I almost didn't exist at home, unfortunately. I would say too, I would back that up to say, I wouldn't recommend most people even do that. The Lord sustained my wife and I through that, and our children, and a lot of that was painting that vision for them, where we're going. And I would add there too, because I think it's beneficial to your listeners. I said, my wife's not into real estate. However, she is 110% behind our mission, our focus, on adoption and our why. And so, she wasn't just, supporting me in this thing that Whitney's over there doing by himself,
Sure.
right? Like she had a vision of what we were doing, of this bigger goal. And I say that also, like when you can paint that vision for not only your family, which they need it first, right? If you're going to venture off and do something like this. But when you can paint that vision to your team, right? To your team members, they can see you're about something bigger than just a new car or house or financial gain, right? It changes that relationship, right? And they can see you're about something bigger because believe it or not, they want to be about something bigger than just financial gain, whether they know it or not. They do. And even more than that, your investors. Like, do your investors know what your mission is, right? And believe it or not, they really want to, whether they admit it or not, they would love to be a part of something that's bigger than just financial gain as well, right? And so, they invest with us. Obviously, they are playing a role in helping these families and helping these children, right? It doesn't affect their returns, but they love being able to be a part of that, right?
Absolutely.
And so I just encourage people to, I know I got sidetracked there just a little bit, but I just encourage people to think about that mission, that why, and that's also helped us to commit, right? When you were talking about that level of commitment, it did that for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know when I started the podcast, I've read 2 books. One was about how to start a podcast, and another one was Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And that was key for me. And I would I'd read another chapter and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to change this now, because the focus kind of, just gave me time to think and to refocus. So that's fantastic.
You asked me though about what I like to do outside of real estate.
Yeah.
And I didn't really answer that, but it was obviously riding horses. I love doing that with my boys. Now teaching them to ride, it's just a sweet time, right? Just teaching them, spending that time with them. We're camping now a little bit, as a family, and that's been great. It was 70 degrees, 65, 70 degrees, like New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. We went camping.
How are you doing the camping? Are you tent camping or RV camping or what?
So a little bit of both. I actually have a horse trailer that has 11 quarters in it that will stay if we're going as a family. But I've got my boys actually into some survival stuff.
Wow.
And so we are not at the moment because it is so cold, and I don't expect them to bear something like that, and I don't want to either. But once it warms up again, we want to do more tent camping. But I want to take my boys out and actually do some more survival stuff. Like we're learning. I got them a book, and we're learning even simple like how to build a fire. Right? You're out in the wilderness, and we go in that. We'll read about it, and then we go out in the backyard and actually do it.
Fantastic.
So that's been really good.
That's cool. So my kids are college age now, and so my wife and I are trying to figure out the travel thing, and so we've rented an Airstream a few times, and we're trying to figure out like what's the best way for us. We're not sure yet, but we definitely do want to do the travel thing. So. In any event, if somebody wants to reach out to you and listeners, look, if you don't know Whitney Sewell, you got to get to know him. Like, you got to check out his podcast, check out his website, and I'll give him a chance to share that again. But just a good guy. And, look, he said it early on, he saw other people that did it. And he's like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. Right. And so can you. If you want to do it, you can do it. So, Whitney, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
lifebridgecapital.com. That's the best place. You can contact me there or most of our team. You can email me, Whitney, at lifebridgecapital.com, or you can call or text me at 540-5854-338. We'd love to connect with you. We also have, some white papers and things like that we've written around syndication and helping passive investors. We'd love for you to have.
Whitney, appreciate you being a leader in the space, helping me along the way and helping listeners, and look forward to seeing you at the next conference and go from there. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
I appreciate you, Darren, and your kind words about us and our business, and a pleasure to know you.
Absolutely. So until next week, signing off.
Thank you for watching Darren Batchelder's Real Estate Investing Show. If you liked the episode, please click the like button and subscribe to the show. If you already are subscribed, then thank you. And please share the show with a friend. Check out other free resources at darrenbatchelder.com/learn.